Welcome to our conversation on AI, emerging technologies. We have with us Dr. Ulrike, who is the Director of the AI Policy Division at WIPO, and she's an experienced IP and patent lawyer with a significant commercial background and exposure to complex international patent litigation, data exclusivity issues, commercial negotiations, competition law settlements, and agreements. In her current role, she focuses on wide-reaching AI policy implications arising from the advent of AI, and I should say frontier technologies, as well as a general purpose technology. And let's just start here. What's keeping you busy these days?
So many things, and I'll come in first. We actually, you're absolutely right, we're Frontier Technologies. We actually renamed into IP and Frontier Technologies. I think that's probably a very interesting question. I'll start with that, what's keeping me busy, because it's something that people always ask, and people always wonder why we've renamed from AI to Frontier Technologies. And it doesn't mean we don't do AI anymore, but Frontier Technologies, whether you look at Industry 4.0, whatever you want to call the new digital world where we're living in, there's a whole raft of technologies that are changing how we innovate and how we live, with a huge economic impact. And of course, AI, artificial intelligence, is a massive part of that. But it's even things like quantum computing, the computer brain interface, blockchain, NFTs, the metaverse. And really, one of the things that's keeping me very busy is to keep abreast of all of these technologies, because one thing I think that we are all trying to keep up with and struggling with is, at one side, IP is quite technical and quite complex, and we're trying to bring that closer to people. But at the same time, it doesn't operate in a vacuum. It operates on some facts. So it's understanding the technologies, understanding what's on the event horizon. So one of the things that keeps me very busy is to try and somehow gain an overview of all of that.
Now, each of these things, AI, blockchain, these are whole disciplines in themselves. How do you possibly stay abreast of all of this, even with a team?
It's a good question. If I had the answer and I could bottle it, I would sell it. I think probably the closest I can get to an answer is I find this stuff fascinating, and I can dive into a world of just getting lost and trying to get up to speed with one of these things. It's one of the greatest joys of the job that I have at the moment, that allows me to do all of that. And in a weird way, life sometimes goes round in circles. I started off as a chemist, and I actually have a PhD in quantum chemistry, which 30 years ago or 25 years ago, I thought would never come in handy or have practical applications. And when you see some of these technologies evolving, like quantum computing with spin states, it puts a smile on my face, because having a little bit of the technical background and having a very curious mind certainly helps.
Yes, it certainly does. And you have really an amazing background. A lot of folks who start in Europe go through Europe and end up in Europe. But from an early age, I would say, an early point in your career, you decided that you want to go across the pond. And so you spent quite a bit of time in the UK. Tell us a little bit about your thinking behind this more unusual path.
Yeah, again, I mean, people like to think it worked out so well in the end. There must have been a great plan behind it. And there really wasn't. There was an awful lot of luck in how some of the things I've done, what I studied and things I've done in my career, came together in what I do right now. Again, I think what drives is curiosity kills the cat. So I've always been very curious. I've always been an adventurer at heart. I grew up in one of the smallest towns in southern Germany, very Hansel and Gretel, as you can imagine. But I had a dad who was a very keen traveler, and from a very young age, he took me traveling with him. So I remember one of the first trips we did is he took me to St. Petersburg when it was still called Leningrad. And I remember the visas taking a very long time to get there. So I think that adventurous spirit has been in me my entire life. I was supposed to go to the UK for 1 year, and out of that became a degree, a PhD, and a career at some point. So very much it's just luck. And if I have a theme that probably runs through my career and through my life, it's the curiosity. I like expanding the brain, and I like learning new things. Can be painful, but can be an awful lot of fun.
And was there ever a thought that maybe you'll just stay in the UK and make a career there?
There was at some point. So I did my PhD, and then I set out to do law with a specific purpose of I wanted to do patent litigation. So the science background helped in that. And also, I mean, my parents are the village pharmacists in that tiny southern German village. The life science, the pharma sector came in quite nicely in what I was doing. And I started, if it's something people are familiar with, I started at Bristows, one of the really traditional patent litigation shops in the UK. And certainly when I first started off, I thought maybe this is it, except for you learn as a young patent litigator very early on that it's not just this national rights, but it's not just a single jurisdiction. A lot of these disputes are happening. And as a very young lawyer, I very often had some of my colleagues and the partners coming to my office saying, oh, there's a parallel case in Germany. We can't wait for the translators. Can you just help us understand what's being said in the German proceedings? So I mean, that sparked the idea to say, can I do both? Because really patent litigation, the two big jurisdictions, or two of the very big jurisdictions, are the UK and Germany. And with that came someone saying, it can't possibly be done. And it can't possibly be done, to me, very often is like a little red flag to a bull. When someone says it can't be done, my natural reaction sometimes is to say, well, we'll see about that. So that's really how I ended up qualifying as a lawyer in Germany, and actually working as a lawyer and as a partner in Germany for quite a while.
You almost need to have that type of mindset as a job description if you're going to hit a unit with the name Frontier Technologies.
Yep. Well, it comes in handy. It comes in handy. My colleagues at WIPO know by now, we call it coffee-fueled conversations. So a lot of that brainstorming that we do, or the broadening of the brain
coffee is
case.
so good. Depending on which part of the US you are these days, it could be pot-fueled conversations.
No, it's definitely with me coffee fueled, and it gets quite adventurous after about the third cup, about 9 o'clock in the morning.
So at some point in your practice, you decided you wanted to go in-house. Tell us what prompted that thinking and where you decided to land.
Well, I mean, I toyed with the idea for quite a few years because it's I think the thing I enjoyed most about being a litigator is seeing the impact of what you're doing, the product that is on the shelf or that isn't on the shelf. So it's really tangible things at the end of the day that you're doing. But you're still a little away from the commercial strategy. And sometimes, of course, litigation settles and you don't really see whatever happens to the commercial jigsaw piece you're playing with. But I had looked around, and there were quite a few opportunities that were basically doing what I was doing as a litigator in private practice. And I always said no to those because it was doing the same thing, just in a different setting. And then this opportunity came along quite funnily. I'd spent 20 years or so in the UK. I'd gone back to Germany. It took me quite a few years to find my feet, and in some ways I had reverse culture shock going back home. And I just started settling in, and then an offer came up to do global strategy at a generic pharmaceutical company. And that clearly involved litigation, but it was a company that had grown very rapidly worldwide, that wanted someone to help them understand how their IP and IP litigation strategy worldwide fits together. So that let me jump into a very strategic role that I had a lot of fun with, and that's really what prompted me to do the move. But that job was back in the UK, so as I just settled in Germany, off I went to the UK again.
Well, sounds like the UK is dotted in your career path, and who knows, might be in your future too.
Absolutely.
Now, and I'm just signaling to all the headhunters out there, please remember that, geez, so open to the UK. Now, there's always a transition. And in this case, you made two transitions. You made a transition back to the continent, and you said that you never quite put your foot into the same stream twice. And having been to the UK, there was a bit of a culture shock. But also, there is a transition from being the provider of advice as outside counsel to a cost center as corporate counsel. So tell us a little bit about those two transitions and how you managed them.
I mean, it's interesting because if I take a step back, as a very young lawyer, I had the great joy and benefit of doing a secondment, and I was seconded to Sony Computer Entertainment, the people that did the PlayStation, and it was so early on. This really ages me. This was the time of the PlayStation 2, so it's quite a while ago. But I remember sharing an office with the head of legal. And she asked me a question. I remember as a very young lawyer doing I'm sure, absolutely fabulous 20-page memo to her about a point she'd asked me. And I remember her turning around to me and said, "Ulrike, what I need to know is what's the risk? So how likely is this to happen? And how much is it going to cost me?" So I remember that you're very much closer as an in-house counsel. You're part of the commercial strategy. I think I've always said to my colleagues and my teams that I have had the benefit and the pleasure to work with over the years. I mean, not even as external counsel, but as in-house counsel, you don't get the privilege of saying it depends. I mean, I think you need to be able to explain different scenarios, but at the end of the day, you need to say, or you need to be able to have the courage to say, if you ask me just from a legal point of view, and there might be other factors that I don't know about, commercial factors, but if I had to place a bet, this is where I would go. I think one of the great things you learn working for, so I think private practice and law firms are incredibly good. In my career, I've been incredibly lucky to learn a very good legal discipline. In turning every stone 3, 4, 5 times to make sure you have your bases covered. I think when you work in-house, one of the things you learn is you almost become a translator and interpreter, because and that's something that in the world that I inhabit at the moment is so key in very many ways, because the IP and legal speak you do within a legal team might not be the best understood within a commercial team or within a finance team. So almost being able to be that interpreter that can go between the worlds and understand the different angles that come in and shape strategy. So I mean, I would probably say if anyone ever asked that, there's great benefits of having seen both sides of that fence, because they give you different skills that come together very, very nicely.
Yes, and it's something that even at the end of their careers, many attorneys fail to do. So that's something I try to instill in my students as well.
Yeah.
Tell us about that second transition that you had to make, and the culture shock that you experienced going home.
To Germany.
Yes.
Well, I mean, it's so funny because clearly culture moves on in 20 years in a very small way. Germany has quite a thriving movie industry. I did not recognize any of the movies my contemporaries were referring to. I mean, my movies were almost black and white that I remembered in Germany and out of date. I think there is a very different culture, and you have
Mhm.
to recognize between the countries. And the anecdote I always say is I remember helping a young lawyer in Germany who was drafting a memo in English. And I was rephrasing it and trying to make it sound a little bit more. And he's working for a British partner, British English. And in the end, I looked at what was sent out and went back to original. And I asked the young lawyer, why did none of the amendments make it in? And the answer was, well, they might have understood it, but I wouldn't have understood it.
Mm.
So it's a very different approach to things. I mean, the other one I remember is in the UK, and I would imagine the US very similar as a
Mm.
culture. If you get an email from a client, you will respond saying, "I got it. I'm working on it." And none of my German colleagues were doing this, and it was driving me slightly bananas. And I said, why does no one acknowledge emails? And the answer was, well, of course we got it. We're working on it. We were working on it as fast. That's the assumption that in the job that we're making. So I mean, there is a little culture shock even in how law is done across the like there's a small channel.
That's
In,
fascinating.
yeah, and
yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I was just going to ask a follow-up question, whether you still see that this today, and perhaps move to the nth degree, because you're at WIPO, and instead of just having two cultures, you have dozens, if not hundreds of different cultures.
You do, and I mean that's one of the really fascinating things. But it's also a learning curve in how you deal with that. And I mean, I always find that make no assumptions is probably the right stance to take, because I mean sometimes I think we're all guilty of it even when we communicate. I mean, I always say it's better to pick up the phone than to send an email. And it's by far better to get up from your desk and walk into someone else's office and have an in-person conversation, because really all of the non-verbal cues and communication that you pick up on are so key. And it's one of the things in the digital world, in the virtual world that we're living in past the pandemic, that is still a struggle. But I also think different backgrounds means you can't assume that the lens you see things through is the lens something is set through or done through. And like the key to everything that we do is communication, but it's even more important in the place I am right now.
Yes, and one can't help but think, looking at all the good work you've done at WIPO, that they almost created this position for you.
that I don't know, but I feel very lucky in the position, because in very many ways it lets me pull on some of the strengths and some of the skills, and possibly also to some degree my personality and my mindset and my way of doing things. But equally at the same time, it's incredibly challenging in a way that it's yet another transition into yet another world that has been it has been a stretch. It has been a very rewarding journey, but making that jump is almost from a law firm to a company was a stretch. Going from the private sector into the international multilateral environment is yet another stretch. And in some ways, I benefit from the things that I've done, but it doesn't mean it was an easy transition to make, but certainly a very rewarding one.
It reminds me of a card that I post in front of my door every morning, and I look at it before I go out. It says, "Growth comes at the point of resistance."
Yes.
And life begins at the end of your comfort zone.
Yeah. Yes.
And I
if
think
you have a copy of that, send it to me, because I absolutely subscribe to that.
Yeah, happy to. So you made then this transition, which you just spoke about a few moments ago, into the international setting, into WIPO. So what was your brief? You came in, they say, we're setting up this new unit. We want you to be the person in charge of it. But what was your brief? What were you supposed to do for them?
I mean, it was again, it's a fascinating story, because there was the first what we now call WIPO conversation, that had happened out of AI arriving as a general purpose technology and really trying to understand what it meant for both IP and the IP system. And as part of that, I think a decision was made to sort of say, well, we don't even understand what all of the questions are. Let's set off by understanding before we even, like, we're not even at a stage to talk about answers. Let's help each other understand what the questions are. A paper was put out there. And there was a consultation on the paper, and at that point, I came in. We're a very small team. There's only 3 of us, and we have a little bit of admin assistance. And at the time, the brief was very much, let's figure out together what the questions are, and then let's see how we go forward with this. Of course, I arrived in Geneva in January 2020. Just before the pandemic. And 3 months later, everyone went into the home office. So I mean, that added another layer of interesting fun to finding my feet in a new country, in a new city, in a new organization, very different to where I was before, and trying to find my feet in AI and IP. But certainly the first mandate that we had is help us figure out what the questions are, and then let's talk about how we might think about addressing those questions.
And in terms of your reporting structure, who do you report to, and what impact does it have on your work in terms of the department that you are part of?
Right. So right now we report into the sector is the infrastructure and platform sector, which some people might know who use Patent Scope and the global brand databases. So it has some of the much smarter than me colleagues in it that actually can do AI, rather than I can only talk about AI. And I mean, from a sector perspective, that is a lot of fun, because it helps having someone understand the technology. But it's also fun because I think when we looked at the questions for IP and the IP system, we ended up really with 2 sides of the same coin. One of them is what I sort of call the policy side of things, and that's saying how from a policy perspective, how does AI and how do all of these frontier technologies fit into the IP system? Is IP law still working and fostering innovation the way it should? And the other side of it, of course, is we're in a world that is digital. We're in a world where we see patent and trademark and IP filings increasing rapidly, but also being much more volatile. We're in a world where we're trying to reach many more people around the world with these IP rights. And actually those technologies, AI and many of the other frontier technologies, are also a key to making the IP system more efficient. So being in the sector that we're in allows us to have a holistic view on all of that. Having said that, all of these technologies, the fascinating thing about them for an IP geek is they really impact every single IP right. So in some ways, it's not the patent sector or not the copyright and related rights sector or mid-written and brands. It allows us to work across all sectors, and that's very much how WIPO works. I mean, at the end of the day, I always think it really doesn't matter too much where you're located, because when you're in that IP world, making the connections across the house is probably much more important.
And in terms of making those connections, do you feel like you have access to the senior leadership and to get their support for the kind of decisions and initiatives that you need to roll out?
Yeah, I mean, it took a little while just because of the pandemic, and clearly when you're parachuted into an organization and everyone works from home, even understanding the structure and who the people are is not that easy. So it's taken a little while, but I think we've made some great connections, and I sometimes jokingly say we're sort of like the techie think tank within the house. And it's also very nice to see that that's becoming very accepted and adopted. And we regularly get reach out from colleagues of saying, oh gosh, I have a question on the metaverse that's on your side. Can you help us find an answer to that? So it's a lot of fun.
So, and this is actually something which I think will be of great interest to national officers, but also to um, industry and private sector lawyers who are trying to pick this up.
Mhm,
AI, frontier technologies,
mhm.
how do you even start learning these things, and how do you get to a level of expertise that you currently possess?
Again, it's hard. I mean, I've had the great privilege of that's all I do, and that's all I've done for almost 3 years. So it's been a really steep learning curve. I mean, I'd probably say having, and I'm not saying do a master's degree in computer science,
Mm.
but I think there are some what I call jazz hand misconceptions about what these technologies currently can or can't do. And they can do some really great things, and they're really not that great at some other things.
Mm.
But as any lawyer out there, I mean, whether you're I don't know, you're a litigator, a corporate lawyer. I mean, law always operates on facts.
Mm.
So having an understanding, a base understanding of the technology, in my view, will make for a much easier way of informing the debate around these topics. So be interested in the technology. Don't shy away from it,
Mm.
but also don't make any assumptions. Actually have a look at that. I think the second thing I'd probably say, and I say that to everyone, it can be really tempting, and that tends to happen because in the IP and legal fields, we're not just IP geeks or legal geeks. We tend to be specialized IP geeks. So we are not just patent lawyers, but we are patent litigators, or we are commercial patent licensing people. It can be really, because it's such a complex field, you can get sucked down into one single part of the debate. But all of these technologies really hit on copyright, they hit on trademark, they hit on patents, they hit on trade secrets, on how IP offices do things. And sometimes you need to have the ability to dive down and really drill down to one specific question. But it's the every so often take a breath, and take the helicopter view and come back outside. And probably, I mean, as sounds very theoretical, as an example. I mean, we all know that there is this current debate on AI inventorship. That's going around the globe. So on a patent application, the term inventor, really statutory construction, does that mean a human or doesn't that mean a human? And should an AI be allowed to be named as an inventor? And you can come to different conclusions on that debate. But then maybe take a helicopter view and say, from a policy perspective, why is there an inventor there? What's the policy perspective for having a human inventor? And then look across the fence on copyright, because there's an awful lot of AI being used in the artistic world and in the music world. Does the same rationale apply for having a human creator or an AI creator? So this is what I mean. Like if you come to one answer in one of the sections that you're looking at of the world, maybe have a look, but don't make the assumption the same thing might have to apply in a different part of the IP legal system. Be interested, be curious.
And that's actually something which incidentally a lot of courts have decided, as you know, and all of them seem to have agreed, and largely on the basis of statutory construction, that an AI cannot be an inventor, it must be a human being. Now, so speaking as Ulrike Till, a human being and not the employee of WIPO, and of course, any view that you express is your own and not that of WIPO's, is, are we diverging from the policy reasons that we actually need to be more sensitive to, rather than just adhering to strict statutory constructions in a world where those constructions may no longer make sense?
What we certainly are diverging from is and I'll pull you back onto the ground, and then we can talk about the Darbus world. But I think what we can't lose sight of is the questions that innovators and creators face right now in the IP system. I know we recently had a WIPO conversation in September about AI inventions, but it was very close to our heart to actually say, oh, let's take a step back. What is an AI invention? And in some ways, there's so much debate about AI inventorship that's something that the debate almost magnetically gets pulled to. But there are questions around an AI invention. It can be a really smart, really novel new AI algorithm or AI model. An AI invention can be what I call AI assisted inventions. So where AI is being used a tool, example in the pharmaceutical industry, to select potential drug candidates or binding sites, but then there's a lot of human invention that goes into it. An AI invention can be an AI based invention. And there are things what I'd call, let's say you have a new electron microscope device that has integrated in it some AI image recognition that clears up the image. And we pull together, we always like to hear from innovators and creators on the ground of how they're using the technology and the questions they face right now. And it was interesting that from the people that we heard from that told us their stories, what they're facing are scenarios of AI models, AI-assisted inventions, AI-based inventions. To them, the AI autonomously generated invention is a long way from what they're navigating right now. So if we're talking about fostering an IP ecosystem and fostering those technologies, I think we can't forget about what we need to do right now. I think we also need to have a real discussion about the capabilities, and that goes back to my point of understanding what AI is currently capable of doing and where I might be going in 5 or 10 years' time. But let's have a focus on the technology. So how close are we? Are we already in a world where AI can invent by itself? Or is that a little bit of future thinking? I'm not a computer scientist. There is debate on that, but many computer scientists currently don't think AI is able of inventing quite yet. But I also think we need to have a real legal IP discussion. What is an inventor? How do you define an inventor? Because only when you understand what the technology can do and is capable of, and when something or someone becomes an inventor, do you see when you might flip into the world where AI inventorship becomes key. Having said that, I also think technology moves incredibly fast. I mean, when we see these technologies mushrooming up, and undoubtedly regulators are always a few steps behind, if not many steps behind. So I think it's very good to have a debate about the policy considerations for the system, about understanding what the choices might be to get ready for that world. And I'll stop because I mean, you can tell I'm super passionate about the topic. I also think from a policy perspective, it's probably not as easy as just changing one word in a Patents Act. Because I mean, yes, you can put something in legislation saying the inventor is not required to be human or something to that kind. But I think each of the policy choices and the implications you have in that world have what I call ripple effects. I'll give you an example. If you continue to require a human to be named as an inventor, otherwise the invention becomes part of the public domain. Just a question, I'm not saying that's the case, but you need to think about, are you somehow encouraging people not to tell the truth on a patent application? Or are you somehow introducing a ground of patent revocation similar to unequivocal conduct for naming the right inventor in the US? If you say, fine, let's have an AI being named as an inventor, that raises the hurdle because AI can process a lot of information, and a lot of things that human mind find hard to see in the forest of data AI can see. Are you suddenly raising the hurdle of inventive step to almost a degree where human invention becomes all obvious and the only patents granted will be to AI? And what does that mean between companies and countries that have different AI capabilities?
Let me ask you this. Do you think that then naming a company as the inventor, just like what we have in copyright law here in the US, the work for hire doctrine, is the solution? Since most AI inventions, if not all AI inventions, really have that corporate interest that's driving it anyway, rather than an individual.
I mean, it's certainly one of the arguments that is out there, and I think some of the AI inventorship project team members are making that case. I don't think it's as simple as that, and I don't think I think right now we're not in a world where AI invents, but we're also not in a world to really have thought through and understood what the policy choices are. So what are the ripple effects onto the system if you think through those options? I also think at some point, if you talk about policy, it's probably worthwhile talking a step back to go back to basics about what's the social purpose of the patent system. And I know that some patent offices and people are starting to think about an economic analysis of, is the IP system working? Is it giving the right incentives within AI, or isn't it? So I think before we jump to what a solution or the right solution might be, I go back to where I started with my mandate 3 years ago. Is I think like anything, and I think any halfway decent lawyer knows, the more time you spend defining the question that you're looking at and understanding the scenario you're in, the better the solution will be when you get to it.
Absolutely. And for those people who are interested in seeing initiatives by national IP offices or countries that are closer to or more developed in the way that they have thought about these issues, which countries would you say they should look at?
I mean, it's interesting because there are many countries. There are many more than you would maybe first of all think are looking at this question. I mean, just to give you again an example, we run the WIPO conversation twice a year now. We tracked about 2,000 people from 120 countries plus each year. So you see the global spread of interest in it. Many of these are from IP offices. Many of these are from member states. And if you want to have a closer look, there's something that we call the AI and IP Strategy Clearinghouse. It's a bit of a name mouthful. It's on our website, but we collate all of the things that is happening in the AI data and frontier tech space. And it relies a little bit, of course, in finding the information or member states giving us that information. But I think that database has over 70 member states, 70 countries in it right now. So I just give that as an example because there can be a perception that this might be the remit of a number of companies or a small number of countries. And really it's a global phenomenon.
And that's very helpful. Now, you mentioned the WIPO conversation a couple of times now, and I do want to get to that. So tell us about this conversation that you had in September. What was the impetus for the event, and what were some of your key takeaways now that you've had a chance for the dust to settle and take a break and take a breather and say, this is what we've learned?
But again, I'll take you a step back because I mean, I always make the assumption that of course, everyone knows about the WIPO conversation, and I get taken aback that, of course, not everyone knows about the WIPO conversation. What is the WIPO conversation? It is something that is now in its 7th round, and we're going to have 2 more going forward every single year. And it was really born out of, I mean, first of all, AI, but then the frontier technologies that raise so many questions for IP and the IP system, but really also out of a recognition that the questions are really, really complex. And it's understanding the technology, understanding what companies, innovators, creators are doing, understanding what IP offices are doing, understanding what the questions are that are out there. It's not a standing committee. It is truly open to absolutely everyone that wants to join us. It's free to register. We keep it mostly in virtual format, so you can dial in from anywhere in the world. It's recorded, so you can dive in afterwards. We make the materials available. But the heart of it is really saying the questions are so complex. The more people we can get together and look at it from different angles, the better we can understand it, and maybe then start talking about some solutions going forward. A session tends to be 2 days, and we always tend to try and have a balance between getting everyone up to speed and taking everyone along. So we start at a level of setting out some of the questions, some of the backgrounds, getting some interest in the topic, and giving everyone a framework for understanding the world that they're operating in. And then we always have much space for sharing of information, sharing of opinions. And it literally is any of your students, anyone listening to this who wants to have a say, who has an opinion about frontier tech and IP is more than welcome. It's frontier.tech@wipo.in. You shoot us an email. We hopefully reply within a day or so, but there is space to get all of that done. So it's a forum. It's I would like to say the global legal forum to have the discussions about IP and frontier technologies. We've looked at data and IP, because data is really what drives all of the frontier technologies, digitalization. And there's some, for IP lawyers, geeks, there's some really fun questions about data and IP. We've done a session on what these technologies can do for the IP system and different tools that IP officers are working on in the private sector. And we've had sessions helping us define the questions raised by AI for IP, diving a little bit into each of these questions. And the last session came really out of a resounding the feedback that we got from member states and everyone working with us, is that they really felt they wanted to dive into AI innovations. So we had 2 days on AI innovations, stories from innovators in the field, AI models, AI-based, AI-assisted, and then a panel that I think everyone enjoyed very much about the Davos cases, which we termed Pandora's box, and then a sharing session. But it was great fun. And for anyone interested, the summary is going to come out. So if you've missed it and you don't want to watch 2 days of videos, there's also going to be a summary read over a cup of coffee that will be out in the next couple of weeks.
And if you send it to me, I'll be happy to post it in the link of the description, so people watch this interview will have the opportunity to just click on that. And
Will do, with pleasure.
We'll include the unvarnished recordings too. So if they want to actually see everything in action, they can have that as well. Were there things from those 2 days that surprised you?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, what always still surprises me is the level of interest that we get in the conversation, and the keenness of people to dive in and have those conversations. I mean, lovely surprises are when the wonderful thing about the virtual format is you can reach so many more people than you would if we all had to travel. When you have people and individuals and IP professionals dialing in from all corners of the globe, and you see them in their office or at home with their headsets on, talking about it, I still get a real buzz out of that. I mean, a highlight for me is we had a live link to a lady in Kenya. She was in the Masai Mara. So our interpreters were sweating, I think, at that point, because a live link means on a mobile phone that the sound quality isn't great. But to have a session like this and you talk about cutting edge technologies, and then you go to someone, and Kate was actually teaching some youngsters machine learning in the Masai Mara. I mean, they're what I call the sort of the shooting star moments of the work that we do, that really gives you that enthusiasm to continue doing what we do.
That's a great description, a shooting star moment, and really shows the breadth and reach of the efforts that you are spearheading. In terms of the content of what was discussed at for those 2 days, were there
Mhm.
things that even after having looked at this material for as long as you have, that you
Mhm.
say, well, I didn't realize this, or this is something that's really going to be helpful in thinking about this issue going forward?
Mhm. But I think it's having the opportunity to pull it all together, because I
Mm,
think in pockets it's information that is out there, but actually
mhm,
being able to give like the bird's eye overview to actually tell a story, yeah, and
mhm,
to have the audience go away to feel like they can navigate the space much easier,
yes.
is certainly something. I mean, um, however much I think we need to talk about what's happening right now in the AI innovation space. I mean, certainly there was so much interest in what I call the Davos panel, the AI inventorship
Mm,
panel. And it was a lot of fun also for the people in the room. But so much of the feedback was, we had Ryan Abbott being one, making the case for the Davos AI inventorship
mm,
project. And someone came up to me afterwards saying, yeah, I was listening to him and was saying, yep, that makes total sense what he's saying. And then we had Dan Back as a proponent arguing completely the other side of the case. And then the
mm,
same person said to me, and Ryan had convinced me. And then I was listening to the next guy, and Dan actually, I think he's gone down as dishwasher man, because he compared AI to be about as inventive as a dishwasher. But the same person said to me, and then he was finished, and I said, he's right too. And then I didn't know which world to operate in. So the fun thing was actually to be able to pull that into a panel where
mhm,
you don't necessarily have pure IP legal experts. It's a much broader audience. And for someone to actually go, well, I kind of get the arguments on either side of the fence, and I'm still confused which is the right one. But I mean, they're really cool moments, takeaway moments for me.
yeah, that's interesting. In the US, the focus in litigation
Hmm.
has not been on who's the inventor, other than, of course, as you mentioned, Ryan Abbott, and he is
Hmm.
on a crusade. Right now, the case is they're trying to get the Supreme Court to hear the case and to decide. But in terms of what you see with corporate litigation, it seems to be more on the question of infringement.
Hmm.
Uh, and there have been a couple of cases, one involving music, where the AI is taking out the words from the music, and then you have that music, and the other is to do remixes.
Hmm.
Then there is another case that Microsoft is the defendant of, and a couple of other companies. And the allegation there is that you are in this open source system, not recognizing the people who are coding it. And as part of this open source license, you're supposed to recognize people, which is an interesting, almost moral rights argument in a country that doesn't expressly recognize moral rights. Have you been following the litigation part of what's going on with AI with respect to infringement? What are your thoughts on these current developments?
I mean, so of course we are watching them quite carefully, because I mean, it clearly informs seeing what the courts around the world and the approaches that are being taken. I mean, it's difficult, if not impossible, for me to comment on litigation and currently pending cases. Having said that, I mean, certainly on the and a lot of the on the more creative side, the
Mm,
cases that you're mentioning, I think a lot of us are very keen to see what's happening in the Supreme Court case in the US, in the Andy Warhol case,
mm.
because that will inform some things going forward.
With respect to
Um,
training data.
yeah, yes. Yeah, and I mean, when you look at the metaverse and you look at fair use
Mm,
and the text and data mining, I think that's also a field that we see a lot of movement in around the world, not just in litigation, but we see a fair bit of movement of countries looking at their text and data mining, and seeing what the options are. Again, I think different people take very different takes on that, but it's certainly a very interesting area to watch, because, and I think it's sort of also goes back to what really excites human imagination. And I think it's things like the art competition where that piece of art was entered a couple of months ago and was the one winning entry that was actually generated by AI. That's the sort of things where I think sometimes frontier technologies like AI can seem very science fiction. Very much people don't think it's part of their everyday life. I think when you look at those cases, part of the interest is also it makes it real. It actually is the world that we're living in.
And one thing that you have done very well is to make AI and this conversation accessible, not just in terms of the conversation that you're having organizationally at WIPO, but through social media as well. Tell us about your thinking about that, and also if you could comment about whether you see in this conversation the north-south divide that we typically see, for example, with access to medicines with AI.
So in social media, I think one of the things I love so much about the WIPO conversation is the reach. And I'm not necessarily a social media person, but it's a great medium to reach many more people than we would have otherwise reached. So and as I said, we do this in the house as a team of 3. We get together and we see what can we do, what can we put out there. You will see from what we do on LinkedIn, the little newsletter that we sometimes send around. We're trying out a very new style of doing things, a little bit of fun, a little bit more direct, a little bit informal. But again, that's to take people with us. I also say to the audience now, we tend to hide 1 or 2 very obscure movie science fiction quotes in those. So we have a little audience that likes spotting them, but that's part of the game that we play. But I mean, the great benefit of that, of course, is that we reach more people. And what was the second part to your question? I completely
the north-south divide. Do you see this
the north-south divide? Yes, we do, of course. But the other side of the coin, of course, is, and this is where I'm an optimist. These technologies are actually, I think, one of the keys to bridging the north-south divide and to catch up. And it's very interesting. So the next WIPO conversation will be on IP and the metaverse. That's going to be March 28, 29. Here's a little bit of advertising for all of your listeners. But
we'll put a link to it too if you send us one.
I'll send you all of the links. But the really interesting thing is there was a study that came out, I think, earlier this year about what people think about the metaverse. And I thought it was fascinating that the metaverse in some ways has a much more positive perception amongst the everyday person in the developing world, in the global south, because it can do things like you no longer have to have a scholarship and travel in person to study law at Yale, for example. You no longer need to have access to the best hospital if you need to do surgery somewhere. Like telehealth or digital health and digital education are one of the things that these technologies enable. I think there are some great examples of what AI can do to help. And again, the last WIPO conversation, we had stories from innovators, and we try and get them globally from around the world. One of them, I mean, all of them stuck with me, but to give the listeners an example, there is a smallish company in Kenya called Halitractor, and again, they should be social media advertising for the work we do, because they didn't have a lot of bandwidth when I was first talking to them, and then in the end they put on the camera for 10 seconds so I could see them, and it's a whole lot of young kids sitting in a warehouse outside Nairobi. But what they do is realizing that a lot of agricultural yield, the difficulty is not necessarily the soil or the rainfall. The difficulty is farmers needing to hire equipment and the equipment not being in the right place at the right time. or if there is heavy rainfalls, equipment breaks down more easily and the spare parts are not in the places where they need to be. So they're using data machine learning, they're using weather data, rainfall data to predict where farming equipment needs to be and also where spare parts need to be to increase yields. So I'll give you that example. So of course, any of these technologies could widen the gap, but I think all of these technologies intrinsically in them have the opportunity to close that gap or narrow that gap.
That is such a hopeful note for the future, and one that we can all work and agree that this is something that we should all be working towards. Now, in terms of your brief for the future, and I know that you're almost making your own path as we go along. What should our listeners and viewers be looking forward to in 2023 and beyond from your shop?
So of course, the WIPO conversation, we're continuing our shop to try and raise awareness, to bring the topic much closer to everyone and really make it relatable and make it explainable. So it goes back to your question. If someone wants to learn and get into it, I'd probably say join us for one or two of the sessions because we try and do that. We are super excited to be diving into the metaverse. I mean, it has how many questions can you ask about IP? So we're structuring the agenda for that at the moment. We will, of course, be continuing to talk about AI. There's things like quantum computing and other really interesting technologies that are coming up that we'll be diving into. We are producing a paper on AI inventorship. Or I shouldn't say a paper, that sounds very boring and we don't do boring things. There's going to be a toolkit or a guide or the things you might want to ask yourself about AI inventorship, a quick read over a cup of coffee that's coming out. We're going to be started working on some really fun fact sheets for innovators and creators in the space to help them out. So there's a myriad of things that we're doing. I always say to people, just bear in mind there's 3 of us, and we're a lot of fun and we work together really well, and we try and push ahead with it. Sometimes it takes a tiny little bit longer than I'd like, but that's just a reflection of the size of the team. But what you can expect from us is probably, or without any doubt, some fun in the space to help us all understand and to help us all shape a better future.
It's incredible how much you're doing with the small team you have. Are there plans to grow the team?
Don't know. So for now we're 3 people. It's a little bit of demand and supply in some way, and questions that we get. But also, I mean, it's really nice to see what you can do with limited resources and still having an impact.
Yes, and here's our pitch for the great work that you're doing. That WIPO should be thinking of giving you more resources if you should need it. but also,
well noted.
and we'll make sure that folks at WIPO see and hear all those wonderful things that you've been doing. But also, just inspired me to say we should get together for a follow-up session, because with all that is on the horizon, I think folks will be very interested in hearing how they pan out the conversation on the metaverse and all these other initiatives.
I'd be more than happy to. It's been really delightful chatting. And as I always say to people, I can chew people's ears off. I hope the passion for what we do comes across. So I hope your listeners find this interesting. And if they do find it interesting, the offer is, of course, here from my side. We can continue the conversation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ulrike Till, who is really doing wonderful work with AI and frontier technologies at WIPO. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Darren.
And I'll stop the recording.